All right, people, let's have our fellow panelists up to the stage as well. You know, if you're wondering if this is the right room, you are in the right room. This is going to be quite a wild panel. So Hans will be starting off without a bit of Hans. He has been playing double duty on multiple panels today. So you know, I think he's still recovering from your intense attention you've been giving to his words. So here's what we're going to do with this panel, right? We're talking about investing beyond borders, right? We're talking about investing globally. 2018, we're at a very interesting inflection point in time where there are three markets like China, India, as well as Southeast Asia who have more internet users than the US, have a much higher GDP growth than the US. We have more unicorns that are non-US than US. And there's 3.5 billion people on the internet and everywhere else waiting for us to invest and build things for the world. So we have right now with us two folks. We have Russell and we have Anne, both coming from different perspectives with different approaches on how to capture this opportunity. Russell himself, he's head of international investments at Naspers. Some of you, of course, who've heard of Naspers know them for cutting an amazing check in a 10 cent a while ago. I think it was $30 million, and then it's right now still holding 31% of 10 cent. So that $30 million check became $175 billion, right? So I think that
wasn't me.
But you know, Russell's done many more similar kind of strategies across like India, Russia, you know, multiple markets, right? So I look up to them as like a grandfather of international investing, grandmaster, sorry, of international investing.
Grandfather?
Yeah, grandmaster. That's what I said. And of course, like yeah, Russell and I have a lot of good fun in these markets. Well, and Anne comes from a different point of view. Like as an entrepreneur, highly successful, 2 edtech companies with exits, and she even stayed on after that, after an IPO of one of them, to stick around, you know, to see what happens after a company. And Village Global, I feel like I already know some of you. You know, I've met Ben. Yeah, so I met one of our partners, Ben, while he was traveling through the world, like researching kind of how to craft the strategy. And of course, like Adam and Sheila, you know, we used to work with them as well. So we'll kick it right off. Like, why not we know that both of you invest globally, but how do you do it? What's so distinct? Like, what's your approach? You know, like who wants to start first?
I'm happy to.
Okay.
So Naspers was born on the southern tip of Africa, and right from the beginning, we have had a very global and adventurous outlook. Initially, we kept our investments for decades in Africa, and then started moving into the high-growth BRIC territories, as everybody was terribly excited about: Brazil, Russia, India, China. Anyway, where there was a large, fast-growing population, good GDP growth, we felt that at some point or another, what was emerging in developed markets like the US would follow in these other markets as well. And by and large, that has turned out to be true, but with very specific wrinkles. And so initially, you know, we spent quite a bit of time looking at models that were working in the US and finding entrepreneurs around the world that we could back that would grow up to be similar to an Amazon, et cetera, et cetera. And what we very quickly realized was that a high degree of localization was actually required. That in order to make these models work required a very local mindset, people that understood what the consumers wanted. And our thesis was to back these people and help them grow. So I guess like many investors, you know, we talk very often of the kind of value that we try and bring. Naspers is an odd vehicle. We're not a VC, we're not a corporate, and we tend to sort of get involved and try and help these businesses grow and scale and learn from each other around the world. So sorry, long answer to a short question, but that's pretty much how we...
Oh, but I mean, it's interesting, right? Like, what I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, like, say, for example, food delivery. You guys are in 30 food delivery companies around the world with market-leading positions. And you're trying to do the same for education, which is something I think both of you have in common.
Right.
Yeah, tell us a bit about that.
So actually, the investments that we've made in food delivery, that was some of our stuff tends to be thesis driven. We have one of the people in the audience over here, Tung, who helps us establish what these various verticals are that we are going to find interesting. What we look for is private companies around the world that are doing good work in that space, and we try and back them and get going with them. The 30-plus market-leading positions that you're talking about actually came from maybe a handful of companies. One of them is Delivery Hero, so we own 23% of that. We're invested in Swiggy in India, a very different model, first-party food delivery. We have iFood in Brazil, and a number of other different players around the world in that space that together among them have over 30 leading positions in those markets. We looked at the business model. We like the two-sided marketplace. It's consumer-focused, which is something that we like very much. And we like the teams, and so we back them and we build up our stake over time and help them operate. We've been trying to do something similar in education as well, and your work with Chega has been absolutely fantastic. That business has really performed exceptionally well. We have a portfolio of businesses with a preference for global platforms. Brainly has over 100 million kids around the world, monthly active users, helping each other with homework. We have Udemy, we have Codecademy, and most recently we also added SoloLearn, which is a business that started out of Armenia, and the entire running cost of that company is probably the salary of many of the people in this, in one person in this audience. Just incredible growth that they managed to achieve in that way.
All right, super. Well, so I guess you're coming from a different end of the spectrum. I mean, of course, Village Global is backed by some very iconic folks, right? Reid Hoffman, you've got, I don't know, who's who, right, in the Valley. Like, how's that all tied together in the Village Global strategy, the Village Global approach?
Sure. Well, we're backed by founders who are really just still have love of the game. And they're named, and they invest both time and money. So even the busiest does 1 or 2 events with portfolio companies every year. And then the other aspect is that we curate a network of angel investors around the world, get to know them, and then we allocate some of our first check capital to them in a really decentralized decision-making model so that we're pushing investment decisions on that discovery of companies to the edges of the network. And literally, once we've allocated capital, we don't have veto power. And then we dive in to help support that company with that angel investor and reserve follow-on and hopefully, accelerate learning with them as a portfolio, as a community of founders. So
it's kind of like how a lot of Valley VC firms may have scout programs. You kind of put it out in front. You're like, no, you don't have a hidden one. We are built on top of scouting as a...
Correct. And it's very transparent. And we believe that the best companies might go overlooked by someone sitting here. And so how do we bring that, as you were saying, the local expertise, the local knowledge, but then also build bridges because we can all learn from each other.
Wow, that's cool. And just for the crowd's knowledge, right, I know I said Reid Hoffman's kind of a backer of Village Global, but they also include Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates and Wojcicki, there we go, and other luminaries, right, as you can check out on your website. So has it already started cutting checks already?
We have, yes. Mm-hmm. Okay. We're sector agnostic, just early stage.
Got it. And in also a lot of global markets right now?
We've done our first investment in Africa, Latin America, and actively looking for more around the world, a bunch in Europe as well. Okay.
Well, global investing, I think, has always been discussed in a form of like, okay, what has worked in, say, the U.S. or maybe China, right? And we see similar models around the world. Sometimes these kind of models are very consumer-facing. And I know sometimes we had some chats that, okay, maybe investors might not do too many B2B. B2B may not have been a focus, more consumer-centric, and I understand you're sector agnostic, so you may have different takes on this. But we're quite curious here at 500 Startups because we also similarly kind of backed a lot of proven business models, but more recently we've seen a lot of opportunities in deep tech, which is kind of contrarian in a way. Like people think of deep tech, they think Silicon Valley, but we've seen deep tech opportunities in as far as like Taiwan or even Bandung in Indonesia, and they're cheaper and they're more interesting, but we're still trying to figure it out as well. What are your take on the deep tech opportunity globally?
Yeah, so Khailee, as you point out, we do tend to focus on consumer-facing platforms, but there's a number of things that we've identified that are going to be spawning a new generation of businesses and increasing the effectiveness of a number of existing ones. It's the standard stuff, right? So it's artificial intelligence, machine learning. We scratched our heads on this one, for a good long time, trying to figure out, is there an investable angle for us? And I think, like many people, have landed up in a situation where it's either there's an AI or machine learning pure play, perhaps like a Palantir or something like that. But really, what we realized we needed to do was, number one, make sure our existing portfolio had the adequate skills and mindset to be able to identify what data was useful and how to use it properly. And when we make investments in new companies, we see it as a huge advantage if they've got the right team that is set up to actually take advantage of the data, the enormous just petabytes of data that these companies do generate, and actually using them to increase effectiveness. So the machine learning and AI thing is something that we're still looking at and trying to get our heads around. We got very excited about Internet of Things at one point, and really have just not been able to find an investment that fits our eye. So potentially one of the previous speakers, I think maybe from GE, may have more success in something like that. But that is not. We'd love to hear if there's something that that we could apply our capital to and our time to work with. We think it'll be very important. And biotech, actually, an area that, particularly here in the Bay Area with UC Berkeley and Stanford, the kind of stuff that's coming out of there, Harvard on the East Coast with, the CRISPR technology that came out. We're absolutely fascinated by this. Super deep tech, still a long way to go, but for now, not really in NASPA's territory.
Or maybe that's where the next 10 cent may come from for you guys. And that'll be a Russell check.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. So we're super excited. We think that innovation is happening everywhere. And what's interesting is some of the regulatory environments are really favoring innovation. For example, we invested in a methane sensing nanosatellite company, and a lot of that work is being done in Canada. And the Canadian government is very supportive, as we all know, of research and development. There's markets around the world where access to healthcare data, and you can argue whether that's good or bad, but is accessible for machine learning, and that's helping technologies for diagnostic imaging and things like that. And so we're excited, and we feel like as an early stage investor, our job is to help some of that technology move out of the labs and into global scale where it can have great impact.
Yeah, I think something I've also, been noticing is that folks who originally worked in, say, Palantir, there are entire teams who may have seen like, we've got a lot of demand from customers in other parts of the world, but maybe Palantir has to prioritize other customers. So they leave to start companies. Like you got a Palantir diaspora going to build these we've invested in some of those. Also from other Valley companies, they just happen to see a different kind of customer set. So in a way, we're still kind of deep tech companies, but they're just serving a different customer as opposed to the American customer. Right. I think Israel as well has produced some very interesting companies which also go global from day one. Yeah. So hopefully all of us would learn together as we start making some of these bets. Yeah. So and you had a background in ed tech, right? And when we talk about 3.5 billion internet users getting online, imagine we can have 3.5 billion really educated, and really high earning internet users online. That kind of far-fetched future can only be achieved if you apply some kind of technology in helping people learn better, right? So how does some of your personal passion and career in edtech kind of inform of what you're looking for investing globally in edtech?
Sure. Well, I think that, in a sense, accelerating change is the only constant today. And if that's the case, then it's harder to predict the future, but you can prepare. And that is edtech. And in a sense, edtech is the one that enables all the other sectors. And I think the interesting trends are personalization, because for too long we've standardized either what you should learn or how you should learn it. And the reality is we should let billions of flowers bloom and help people discover that. The other is that I think we've thought of education as episodic, but or the thing you do in the first 18 or 20 years. And the reality is it has to move to continuous. And in fact, I think the future of work is school. And in a sense where we have the world's knowledge in our fingertips with a device like this, and the actual knowledge base in China, there's an expression sometimes of knowledge explosion. Like there's more knowledge being added to the world every day than ever before. So in those worlds, in a sense, knowing is obsolete. The skill of learning and synthesizing is the skill that we need to learn. And that actually puts the entire education infrastructure, in a sense, in a potential to be obsolete in a good way, meaning that we have the opportunity for much better. So personalization, I think AI-driven tutors, there's that old, I think, example by Bill Gates. If you took a surgeon from the 1800s and you put him in an operating room today, he or she could not function. Today, if you put a teacher from the 1800s in a classroom, they'd be just fine. And that should change. We can elevate and not eliminate a lot of jobs through education.
Absolutely agree with that. Some of the innovation that we've seen is actually, it's not, it doesn't seem very fundamental, but in the way that it connects teacher with learner is completely revolutionary. We've seen, like, for example, guys like Baiju in India. I don't know if anybody here has come across this phenomenon. The way that he started out, he was a teacher, and he started teaching kids math, right? You wouldn't think this is a very glamorous or exciting situation. When we met with the guy, he showed us a video of a stadium that he'd filled in a town in India. There were 24,000 people in the audience. People had brought their, families came with their kids, and it was like a rock show. It was, there were lights, and there was somebody on stage talking about algebra. And what he's very cleverly been able to do is he's actually brought that into the digital realm so that it's accessible, to the hundreds of millions of Indian people with a smartphone that can access this, this tremendous connection in that virtual way. And another example of it would be Cindy Me, VIP kids coming out of China. When you see these 70,000 teachers in the American Midwest having these video conference one-on-ones with kids in China, and they're using sort of Snapchat filters, put a little crown on the kids' head when they get something right. It's a very, very engaging process that does change that classroom model of somebody standing in front and 30 bored kids reluctantly sitting there doing their stuff. And we're hoping to see. We're very excited about EdTech. We think it's there's a ton of stuff still to come, and we're very anxious to find ways that we can contribute to this.
I think what's interesting to kind of build on those examples, right, is that I think that the getting folks educated and getting folks to earn more money is getting closer and closer together. Like sometimes people think that, okay, EdTech, let's teach them like math and science or whatever. But like a lot of folks, especially in emerging markets, like they want to get better jobs. In the early days when we're looking at Vietnam, like I was told of how Yahoo 360, old school product, was being used for people to teach each other English. So they had this English club that was run on Yahoo 360, and apparently all the Vietnamese cities had folks coming together. And when they have like an expat or some traveler from out of town who speaks English, they just come around to talk, right? Why? It's because if they learn better English, then they would earn more. They know they will earn more for the rest of their lives, right? So a lot of folks are in the broader 3.5 billion internet users. They're really looking for ways that they can learn something so they can earn something. Right, I think those kind of things start to make things interesting.
Go ahead, Anne.
Oh yeah, and maybe there's ways to think about entrepreneurship, hard skills and soft skills, which can help people be entrepreneurs as well. And and I think it's exceptionally important to cultivate that love of learning in a time when the robots are coming, and in a good way, it's an opportunity, right? Work should be safer. It should be less routine in a sense, and more meaningful, and more opportunity.
I'll share a story on this because I think that this not only represents like a global story, but also a big investment opportunity. I think that having folks learn more so they can earn more, I think is one kind of thing that played itself out in this Malaysian. There was a Malaysian construction worker, right? Who he was a bricklayer, and so he's he's not earning that much. But what he prioritizes and what a lot of folks prioritize is maybe they might skip a meal to save money, but they'll make sure they have data so they can be entertained. But what he did instead was that he's like, I must get out of this bricklaying job. So he was on YouTube and he was following videos on how to build interior design structures. So for some good stroke of luck, he got a gig to build Malay wedding structures, and then he became recommended, well known, and so his story was all over Malaysian press because he could suddenly afford to buy his mom a car, bought a house, and everything, in 2 years. And then the whole article was just talking about how he learned all that stuff off YouTube. So, yeah, sorry.
Well, no, I think that's so interesting. And what this says is learning without paying to learn, right? And so this is where, we're spending billions for public school infrastructure, and then people are spending, whether out of pocket or through the government, for higher ed. And is it the kind of learning that helps you earn or that helps you grow and thrive in today's world? And we invested in a company called White Hat, which is an alternative to university in the UK. And the UK government is very smart because they said either an employer can pay a payroll tax or they can invest that money in an apprenticeship program. And so the startup is emerging to say, hey, we can help you run those apprenticeship programs. And that's just a fundamental, these alternatives to expensive college are important.
So you know what? Let's extrapolate this to a different trend. A lot of global markets, sometimes the exciting ones are very young, right? They'll maybe like 70% under the age of 30. A lot of Southeast Asia markets are like that. But there are also a lot of big global markets with a booming aging population, right? So of course, folks think about healthcare, but a lot of the people who are so-called aging in some of these countries, they actually have a lot of money to spend. They're also trying to learn and lead second lives. They're traveling a whole lot. Do the both of you see opportunities within that kind of line of thinking?
Sure. So we spent quite a bit of time thinking about the burgeoning sort of elderly care segment, and demographically speaking, this is something that is a phenomenon. People are living longer, they are productive longer, and with it they also need care, extending beyond what governments have been set up to actually provide. And so we've been looking at that segment. We've made one investment in Honor that headed up by an ex Google chap. The challenge with it is from a consumer perspective, the elderly tend not to be very tech savvy, and so an ability to connect directly is non-obvious and requires usually some kind of distribution or a channel approach in any kind of marketplace you might be looking at. But we do see a tremendous need and therefore a tremendous opportunity there as well for technology to help with that.
Would you do a model like that in multiple countries as well, like for Honor?
For sure, it tends to be very local. You need to have people on the ground in the various places to make sure that the quality is good, and it's not as light touch as some of the other things that we do. For example, classifieds. So geographic expansion would have to be very carefully planned and deployed.
And yourself?
Yeah, there's so many opportunities there. There's the actual longevity sector, so people trying to live longer, which is a huge, and then improving that quality of life, because I think you're right that they're productive longer in doing things. But it does change everything from the nature of housing, because I think people care a lot differently about their space, how they can navigate their space, like different doorknob technologies and sensors and things like that. So it's really an exciting opportunity.
Okay. So let's kind of I'm going to delegate some of the rest of the moderation to the both of you. What are you curious about to learn from each other? What questions would you have for each other when it comes to global investing?
I'd like to find out where Hans is.
Yeah, I know. Me too. You know what I mean? I wonder where Hans is too. Yeah, he was here this morning for the other panel. I guess he's tapped out. He's got some unicorns to catch.
No stamina.
That is funny. Okay, Russell, I have a question for you. So as you're looking at founding teams or teams across the world, are there universal attributes and values, or is it marketing market and company specific?
So in the time that I've been doing this, there has emerged a kind of a profile of a founder that tends to do better than others, and usually it's like the soft stuff, you know. It's the fact that they are in the detail, very, very focused, and know exactly what's going on in their business, but they also very rarely have a big picture view. They tend to be insatiably curious, want to know all the details. You'll casually mention like a campaign that worked in this country or that country. They want to get into the details and go very deep, and they follow up. So curious, humble, and yet a very strong sense of self is typically something that we find works very well.
Do you have any questions for Anne?
Yeah, I want to find out about Chegg. So have you been charting their progress over the last year?
Yes, they've done better since I've left. Yeah,
because you're so good at building leaders. That's why. That's excellent. You know, so we got a couple. Of minutes left. I know there are a lot of VCs and GPs in the room, right? And one thing that we've noticed is the world of LP money from all around the world trying to buy into innovation in the Valley and everywhere else. And I know Russell doesn't need any LP money because Naspers has hundreds of billions, in their own pockets, right? But do you guys fundraise globally from global LPs? Like, what have you seen so far? What have you seen so far in LPs looking into your fund?
well, I think there's a interest in Silicon Valley, of course, but there's also, I think there's a growing appreciation that innovation is happening everywhere, and probably the best thing is for us to learn from each other and to not duplicate efforts. And, there's a concept in machine learning that, like for Uber or Lyft, they call it fleet learning, which is when one car learns that you can't turn right on the street, the entire fleet learns and kind of elevates. What if the human race was like that, right? Meaning the entrepreneurial models could move, and it's not that things transfer directly, but the way of thinking about solving a problem could be super helpful. So again, I think that's just an amazing opportunity for capital to flow to these innovative to fund entrepreneurs.
It's called the 500 Startups thesis. No, I'm kidding.
Totally.
But all right, so okay, I want to make this. We're wrapping up now. I want to give this an invitation out to everyone over here. If this panel has teased or excited you about the prospect of investing globally, or if you already do it a whole lot, there is not any one of us can cover as many markets as Naspers can. But at the very least, the next time when you're considering a vacation, consider also a co-investment. Come by, visit. You've made friends over here from around the world. It was so random. We had the VC was managing the rapper Nas, like his money. He came by Jakarta and Singapore a few years ago. I recommend him to invest in Bukalapak, and so that check is worth 39.5 times on the money right now. So if you guys want to visit Southeast Asia or Middle East or Vietnam or anywhere else, reach out to a 500 friend or some of your friends right here at Pre-Money. And thank you so much for joining us in this panel. And thank you to both of you.